About myself. My name is Emily Anderson, and I'm 29 years old. I was born and raised in San Francisco, California, a city where the buildings seem to glimmer under the fog, and life pulses with a unique blend of ambition, diversity, and creativity. Growing up, I always felt like I was in the center of something exciting, even if my own life sometimes felt remarkably ordinary compared to the vibrance and fast pace outside my window. My parents are both teachers. My mom is an English literature professor at a community college, and my dad teaches history at a local high school. I remember countless evenings spent around our old wooden dining table, discussing everything from Shakespearean plays to world politics. They valued critical thinking and honesty above all else, which has shaped the person I am today, for better or worse. As a kid, I was always curious. I filled notebooks with drawings, stories, and plans for inventions that never quite made it past the brainstorming stage. I was never the loudest kid in the room, but I loved people, observing them, listening, and trying to understand the intricate ways relationships work. That early fascination probably nudged me towards studying psychology at Stanford, and later helped me build a career in product management for a growing tech company. My days now are a whirlwind of meetings, strategizing, and creating solutions for problems I never even knew existed before I entered this field. But work isn't everything. My heart still belongs to the city, the coffee shops tucked away between murals, running along Crissy Field with the Golden Gate Bridge looming in the distance, or meeting friends at Dolores Park on a lazy Sunday afternoon. San Francisco is the kind of place that can make you feel small and infinite at the same time. I cherish the anonymity of the crowds, but I also feel an almost fierce loyalty to the tight circle of friends I've built here. Speaking of friends, I'm someone who believes deeply in the power of close relationships. Maybe it comes from moving a lot as a kid, always having to remake my world every few years until we finally settled in the city. It taught me the importance of trust, of finding people who see you, the real you, even when you don't have the words to explain yourself. That's how I felt when I first met Jessica Parker at Stanford. I had no idea then just how pivotal our friendship would become in my life. Despite my outward stability, I'm not without my share of insecurities and doubts. I've always struggled with wanting to keep the peace, sometimes at the expense of my own feelings. Conflict never sat well with me, and I'd rather work behind the scenes, quietly ensuring everyone else is okay, than risk open confrontation. I say this not out of pride, but as a truth that has both protected and hindered me. Looking back, I see a person who's strong but cautious, kind but sometimes naively so, and above all, someone who values authenticity and loyalty, qualities I believed were mirrored in the people closest to me. That core belief, as you'll soon learn, would be severely tested in ways I never could have predicted. A steadfast friendship. If someone asked me what loyalty looked like in its purest form, I would have described my friendship with Jessica Parker. At least, that's how I used to feel. Jessica and I met during our very first week at Stanford. I was the nervous freshman clinging to my planner and desperately searching for the right lecture hall, while Jessica breezed in late, offered me a beaming smile, and asked if I wanted to sneak out for coffee before class even started. We were complete opposites, but maybe that's exactly why our friendship clicked from the beginning. We did nearly everything together in college. Group projects that stretched into midnight pizza runs, last-minute study cramming before finals, and moments of jubilation when we aced an exam or simply made it through a rough week, Jessica brought a spontaneous energy to my life that I didn't even know I needed. If I was feeling burned out, she'd kidnap me for an impromptu hike up to Twin Peaks to watch the fog roll in, or drag me into a student protest just to see me loosen up and laugh. Our friendship wasn't just about the fun, though. We shared a level of trust that felt almost sacred. I told Jessica things I had never told anyone else. When I was homesick, she brought me my favorite tea without asking. When campus drama threatened to overwhelm us, we huddled in her tiny dorm room, exchanging secrets and messy confessions until the stress dissolved. There were countless nights we kept each other company through heartbreak, ambitions gone sideways, and family crises relayed through tearful phone calls. Our closeness became a constant, a safe space that seemed unshakable. After graduation, while many friendships faded as classmates scattered across the country, our bond persisted. We both landed jobs in San Francisco and rented a quirky little apartment in the Mission District, splitting bills and chores, swapping stories about our new roles, and the oddities of post-college adulthood. Jessica's job in public relations pulled her into the world of high-profile mixers and glamorous events. She seemed to thrive in every social situation, while I was content observing from the sidelines. But even as our circles grew and our schedules loaded up, we always made time for our inside jokes, celebratory sushi dinners, and marathon chats about everything and nothing. Some of my best memories from those years are impossibly simple. Listening to records and painting our nails on the fire escape in the chilly bay breeze, or mapping out bold plans for traveling the world. Someday, we promised. Someday soon. More than once I'd find a handwritten note or a silly meme Jessica had left taped to my laptop, even on days when we barely crossed paths. Looking back now, those years with Jessica shaped who I was, as much as any class or job ever could. She wasn't just my best friend. She was family, the sister I never had. In a city full of noise and restless ambition, Jessica was my anchor. I truly believed nothing could threaten the foundation we'd built together. The man who changed everything. People always tell stories about life's turning points, those seemingly insignificant moments that, in hindsight, shape everything that comes after. Sometimes it's no more than a chance encounter, a casual introduction at a crowded party, or someone offering you a drink at a bar while jazz music winds its way through the air. For me, the moment that changed the trajectory of my adult life began in the marbled lobby of the Fairmont Hotel, with San Francisco city lights flickering beyond the panoramic windows and the low murmur of the city's elite buzzing all around. Jessica and I had both been invited to a charity gala, the sort of event more suited to her role in public relations than my quieter product management job. I remember feeling underdressed, despite my careful effort. A midnight blue dress borrowed from Jessica, the makeup she'd cheerfully done for me, a pair of shoes that pinched my feet as I trailed behind her through the clinking glasses and clusters of beautiful strangers. The room was full of people who spoke in confident tones and laughed with easy, practiced grace. Jessica belonged here, as she always seemed to. I did my best to blend in. It was Jessica who first spotted Adam Miller. He stood near the bar, laughing with a group of sharply dressed executives. Something about the way he carried himself demanded attention. Tall, with an athletic build, dark hair kept just slightly tousled, crisp designer suit. He looked both perfectly at ease and slightly removed, as if he were in on a joke nobody else quite understood. Jessica and I exchanged a glance, and I could see the wicked spark in her eyes. She was never shy about making introductions. She swept me across the room, and, before I could protest, I found myself face to face with the man whose name I'd heard in hushed tones among San Francisco's business circles. I recognized him from news articles and event programs. Adam Miller, the CEO who'd taken a scrappy fintech startup and turned it into one of the city's boldest new enterprises. I half expected him to be aloof or distracted, the way people of his stature sometimes are at these gatherings. But Adam turned his attention to us with instant focus, his handshake steady and warm. Jessica was her usual charismatic self, launching immediately into an easy banter that drew laughter both from Adam and the group he stood with. She radiated confidence, regaling everyone with funny stories about disastrous first dates in the best or worst coffee shops in the city. I hovered at her side, enjoying the sparkle of her energy, until Adam turned his attention directly to me. "And you?" he asked, with a smile that seemed to cut through the crowd. "You've been quiet. What do you do, Emily?" There was nothing flirtatious in his question. He seemed genuinely interested. It put me at ease. I found myself explaining more than I intended, describing my work, how much I loved the problem-solving aspect of product management, and even talking about my family's roots in the city. Adam listened, not the perfunctory listening of people at cocktail parties, but attentive, asking perceptive questions, and drawing me out of my shell. Jessica noticed, and for a few moments, the three of us were locked in conversation, as if the rest of the room had faded away. The rest of the night blurred by. Adam drifted from group to group, but always seemed to circle back to us. Jess and I walked home in the chilly night, giddy and half dizzy, from laughter, and perhaps a glass too much of champagne. I didn't even mention Adam, but of course, Jessica did. "So, do you think he's as charming as everyone claims?" she teased, nudging me as we turned onto our street. I shrugged, playing nonchalant. "I mean, it's easy to be charming in a tux. Let's see how he is over greasy tacos at 2 a.m. We laughed about it, and in the weeks that followed, I honestly thought nothing more would come of it. San Francisco is a city of fleeting encounters, but Adam had a knack for making things permanent. A few days later, Jessica forwarded an invitation to another event, this time a private fundraising dinner in the marina. Adam was hosting. She responded for both of us before I could object. "You need to get out more, Em," was her justification. I was equal parts reluctant and curious. The second meeting was less formal, with fewer people and lower stakes. Adam remembered details from our previous conversation. My work project, the name of my college roommate, even the way I'd describe my favorite bakery on Valencia Street. It felt as if he genuinely wanted to know our thoughts. Not just Jessica's, but mine too. After dinner, as the evening wound down, and the music from a nearby jazz trio faded, Adam suggested a walk along the water. He led the conversation easily, asking questions about technology, new business ideas, and, occasionally, about life outside of work. Jessica was in her element, confident and quick-witted. I contributed, but often retreated to listen, half afraid of saying the wrong thing in front of someone so accomplished. That night marked the beginning of a shift. The three of us started running into each other more and more, sometimes at organized events, sometimes by Adam's casual, "Are you two free for brunch?" texts in the group chat. In those early months, our trio seemed natural. Adam brought out the best in both Jessica and me. When we were all together, the conversations sparkled. We joked that we were an unbeatable trivia team, blending Jess's pop culture savvy, Adam's encyclopedic memory for facts, and my ability to make sense of obscure clues. Yet beneath the surface, something more subtle was happening. At first, I chalked it up to coincidence. The way Adam's eyes sometimes lingered on me across the table, how he would sometimes address questions specifically to me, urging my opinions. Other times, it was Jessica who seemed to dominate his attention, making witty remarks and easily captivating his focus. I began to feel a tension between us. Not quite rivalry, at least not then, but a certain charged energy that neither of us wanted to name. One evening, Adam invited us both to a startup showcase downtown. The event was a blur of high-tech demos, awkward elevator pitches, and sparkling wine. Near the end of the night, Adam and I found ourselves alone at the balcony, looking out over the city. He told me about his anxieties, his self-doubt when making big decisions, how sometimes the pressure felt overwhelming. It was startling, seeing his vulnerability, and I felt a wave of sympathy, even admiration. For someone so seemingly invincible, he was achingly human. After that, things shifted yet again. Jessica started texting Adam separately, sometimes inviting him to join our outings, sometimes meeting up on her own. I tried to ignore the pangs of jealousy that crept in. After all, she had always been the more outgoing one. Occasionally, she'd make lighthearted jokes about his attention. "Looks like Adam's got a little crush on you," she'd say, grinning. I'd laugh it off, even as I wondered what she really meant. It didn't take long for me to recognize my own feelings. I'd lie in bed at night, replaying conversations in my head, dissecting every word Adam had spoken to me. I'd catch myself choosing outfits with unusual care on the days I suspected we might see him. It was a slow, reluctant realization. I was falling for this man. This smart, kind, occasionally awkward man who seemed to belong to a world both familiar and impossibly far from my own. But at the same time, I noticed a subtle transformation in Jessica. She was more competitive, more animated whenever Adam was around. She would tell elaborate stories about their one-on-one outings, concerts, art shows, late-night cocktails after work events. Sometimes I got the sense she was trying to provoke a reaction in me, or perhaps reassure herself of her own influence over him. Our friendship, so easy and natural before, became laced with small tensions and silent questions. Still, I told myself it didn't matter, that it was silly to risk years of friendship over a crush. Yet the triangle we had formed was growing more complicated and emotionally fraught. At a 4th of July rooftop party, before the fireworks, Adam pulled me aside. We talked about everything and nothing, and for a moment, I felt the world shrink to just the two of us. Out of the blue, Adam confessed he had never felt so at home with a group of people since moving to the city, and I could see something vulnerable flicker in his eyes. Later, Jessica spotted us together, and, for the first time, I saw something unfamiliar and sharp in her gaze. The three of us managed to keep up appearances, but after that night, there was an unspoken awareness hanging between us. Autumn rolled into the city, bringing colder nights and more invitations from Adam. Sometimes he'd message Jessica and me separately, sometimes together. I found myself caught between two truths: my growing affection for Adam and my loyalty to Jessica. I wanted to believe that we could remain friends, no matter what happened, but I could sense the invisible fault line running right through the middle of our trio, ready to split everything open. There were evenings I'd watch the two of them laughing over drinks, feeling both present and distant, like I was watching my own life from the outside. In quieter moments, Jessica would confide in me about her hopes, her fears, and her strong feelings for Adam, never asking me directly, but always searching my face for some trace of what I truly felt. To complicate matters, Adam sometimes seemed to seek me out privately. Once, After a shared Uber ride home from an event, he lingered at my doorstep, telling me a story about his childhood in Chicago and the loneliness he felt after his parents' divorce. I remember that moment vividly. Streetlights pooling gold in the fog, Adam standing hesitantly with his hands in his pockets, the air between us thick with a mix of longing and uncertainty. I wish I could say I acted decisively, or even that I knew what I truly wanted. But in reality, I was torn, caught between friendship and desire, between what I owed Jessica and what I wished for myself. Looking back, it's easy to see that the seeds of everything that came next were planted during those months. The newness and excitement of Adam's presence, the rush of possibility, began as something beautiful, but it carried all the quiet, inevitable gravity of something that would one day reshape all of our lives. Stepping aside and the heartache. Some decisions feel monumental at the time, others just slip into place almost quietly, as if the universe expected you to make them all along. Choosing to step back from Adam was one of those moments for me. Painful, yes, but also oddly inevitable. It wasn't a single conversation or a dramatic confrontation that led to my decision. Instead, it was a collection of moments. The way Jessica's eyes sparkled around him, the way her stories about their one-on-one outings grew more elaborate, and the increasing tension that crackled in the air every time the three of us were together. I can still remember the exact night I made up my mind. It was late October, San Francisco gripped by a damp chill that crept through the walls of our Mission District apartment. Jessica and I were both at home for once, drinking chamomile tea in the tiny kitchen. She was scrolling through photos on her phone, pausing occasionally to show me pictures from the cocktail hour she'd attended with Adam the night before. Her voice was animated and delighted, and I could tell that she was reliving each detail. The mahogany bar, the jazz band, Adam's offhand jokes, how he insisted she try the truffle fries. At one point, she looked up at me and said, almost shyly, "You know, I haven't felt this excited in years." That was the moment. It wasn't jealousy I felt, at least, not quite. It was something subtler, a whisper inside me that said, if you love her, let her have this. Don't ruin it. Jessica and I had been through so much together. Didn't she deserve a chance at happiness? And didn't our friendship deserve to survive, even if it meant carving out a part of my heart and placing it carefully aside? I thought about what Adam meant to me, about the electric undercurrent I'd felt in every conversation, every stolen glance, and every lingering silence between us. But I thought even more about the long history I'd shared with Jessica. The late-night talks, the loyalty, the way we'd always promised we'd put each other first. I told myself it was the right thing to do. The next few days were a test of quiet endurance. I started making conscious choices, turning down invitations when I knew Adam would be there, leaving group chats unread, suggesting that Jessica and Adam hang out, just the two of you, so you guys can get to know each other better. Sometimes Jessica would look at me, almost searching for a sign, but I made sure to keep my poker face intact, acting as if nothing had changed. Inside, though, I was wavering. I forced myself to cheer her on as she prepared for each date, laughed at her impressions of Adam's quirks, and offered advice when she worried about sending the right text or reading his signals. It was like watching someone else wear my clothes, step into my favorite memories. There's a unique ache that comes from denying something you want for yourself in order to give it away to someone you love. I became an actor in my own life, mouthing encouraging words while privately nursing an ache that only grew sharper with time. At work, I found it increasingly hard to focus. I'd pore over UX specs or roadmap updates, my eyes glazing as my mind drifted back to flashes of recent weeks. Adam's half smile at the bar, the way he always remembered what I liked on my latte. The night when we'd shared an Uber and he confessed how lonely he felt sometimes, even in a crowded city. They replayed in my head like scenes from a film I was no longer starring in. One Friday, a group of us from my office went out for drinks after closing a big project. Even surrounded by my coworkers' laughter and the clink of glasses, I felt strangely adrift. I texted Jessica, telling her to have fun with Adam. Her reply was immediate. "Wish you were coming. It's not the same without my bestie." That stung more than I expected. In trying to make space for her to be happy, I'd drawn a quiet boundary between us that I didn't know how to cross back over. What surprised me was how quickly people noticed the distance. My friend Mark, an engineer with an uncanny sense for unspoken drama, pulled me aside one afternoon. "Hey, you good?" he asked, peering at me over his coffee mug. "You seem off lately. Not your usual Emily." I brushed him off with a smile, mumbling something about taking on too many product launches. But that night, lying in bed, I realized how much of my identity was bound up in being the steady one, the one who never made waves, who supported everyone else, who never quite demanded anything for herself. For a long time, I'd worn that role like armor, but now it left me feeling hollow. Thanksgiving approached. Jessica spent hours debating what dish to bring to Adam's Friendsgiving party, agonizing over whether he liked green bean casserole or sweet potatoes better. I helped her pick a wine and loaned her my favorite blue dress, the one I'd worn the first time we'd met Adam. She twirled in the hallway, excitement radiating off her. "Aren't you coming?" she asked, pausing in front of my door. "Adam asked if you'd make your salted caramel brownies. I think I'll skip it this year," I said gently. "You go. It'll be more fun with just the gang, anyway." She hesitated for a split second, studying me, but then smiled and waved goodbye. I spent that evening alone, curled up on the couch, watching the lights of the city flicker through the window. I told myself I'd done the right thing, but it didn't make the ache disappear. In moments like that, I started to question if self-sacrifice was all it was cracked up to be. December arrived, bringing with it the city's damp, bone-chilling fog and the relentless cheer of the holidays. Jessica and Adam seemed to be out together more often. Tree lightings at Union Square, holiday parties, ice skating by the Embarcadero. She recounted every detail to me eagerly, as if wanting me to be part of them by proxy, her words weaving me into moments I'd never truly share. Sometimes, I wondered if Adam noticed my absence, or if he interpreted it as disinterest. He'd text, "Missed you tonight. Hope everything's okay." I'd always reply, vaguely, "All good, just swamped with work." And each time I did, it felt like erasing another footprint on a path we'd started together. But the cost wasn't only to myself. As Jessica immersed herself in Adam's orbit, our friendship began to change in subtle ways. Previously, she would text me throughout the day. Funny memes, quick rants, random questions. Now her responses grew slower, her tone distracted. She talked more about Adam's friends than ours, about upcoming dinners, and his opinions on everything from art to politics. What hurt the most was the gradual sense of isolation, the realization that in letting go of something I wanted, I might also be losing my place in Jessica's life. I had hoped my sacrifice would preserve our closeness. Instead, it seemed to be building an invisible wall between us. Over the holidays, I went home to visit my parents. Sitting in my childhood room, surrounded by relics of earlier years, old art projects, faded ticket stubs, high school yearbooks, I tried to make sense of everything I was feeling. My mother, perceptive as always, found me one morning staring out at the fog-covered city I'd grown up in. "Sweetheart, you can't keep giving away your happiness for others," she said gently, wrapping her arm around my shoulders. "Sometimes it's okay to want something for yourself." I wanted to believe her, but guilt still gnawed at the edges of that wish. Was I being selfish, or was I just tired of being invisible? New Year's Eve rolled around. I was invited to Adam's rooftop party, but I made an excuse to stay home. When midnight struck, I sat by myself with a glass of Prosecco, watching the city's fireworks burst and fade across the bay. I made a quiet resolution. If I was going to move forward, I had to find a way to make peace with my choices, not just for Jessica, but for myself. The weeks that followed were marked by a strange calm and a vulnerability that wasn't easy to sit with. I started journaling again, pouring my tangled feelings and unsaid words onto the page. I reconnected with friends I'd let slip away during the whirlwind of the past few months, rediscovering simple pleasures like gallery walks and Sunday morning yoga. Little by little, I tried to reclaim the corners of my world that had gone dim, but the pain lingered. There were nights I dreamt of what might have been, of coffee dates that weren't cut short, or the comfort of Adam's easy searching questions. Sometimes I wondered if Jessica truly understood what I'd done, if she had any inkling of the internal calculus behind my distance. Other times, I feared she never would. The heart, I've learned, is infinitely expansive, and yet heartbreakingly fragile. You think you can will it to be generous, only to discover that even the most selfless acts leave scars. I kept showing up for Jessica, kept cheering her on, but some kernel of trust, some sense of certainty, had shifted between us. I felt it in every awkward pause, every change of subject, every moment when being together didn't quite feel the same. Looking back, I know it wasn't only about Adam. It was about the changing nature of friendship as we become adults, the way priorities realign, the way small decisions ripple outward, and the way loving someone sometimes means letting them go, even when it leaves you lonelier than before. If I could speak to the version of myself who made that choice, to step aside, to put loyalty first, I'd offer her compassion. I'd tell her that heartbreak, in all its shapes, is real and worth mourning. But I'd also remind her that no single moment, no matter how painful, defines the whole of her life or her capacity for joy. In the end, stepping back from Adam didn't make me stronger overnight, and it didn't magically preserve my friendship with Jessica in the way I'd hoped, but it did reveal truths about myself I might never have faced otherwise. That courage sometimes looks like silence, that boundaries are necessary, and that healing, while slow, is always possible, especially if you're willing to let the light in, one small kindness at a time. Hidden secrets. If you had asked me in those first months after stepping aside whether I regretted anything, I probably would have lied and said no. That's what you do when your heart is aching. You convince yourself the sacrifice was noble, the pain temporary, and that your reward will be a friendship restored. What I never expected was that silence would be met not with gratitude, but with something far more dangerous: deception. No one ever tells you how quickly the ground can shift beneath your feet. When the first rumors about me began to swirl through our circle of friends, I didn't notice. Not at first. I chalked up awkward pauses in conversation, missed invites, and brief, polite texts to the natural drift of adulthood. San Francisco is a busy city, and everyone's always hustling. New jobs, cross-country moves, competitive ambitions. That's what I thought. But odd moments started accumulating. I'd bump into mutual friends for coffee, and conversations felt stilted, their laughter slightly forced. I'd enter a room and sense a lingering tension, as though I'd just missed the tail end of a private joke or a whispered confidence about me. Mark, my quietly observant coworker, mentioned in passing that Jessica seemed upset about something we needed to talk about. When I pressed him, he just shrugged awkwardly and changed the subject. It wasn't until the Sunday afternoon brunch, one of those lavish affairs in a sunlit Mission District apartment with homemade muffins and bottomless mimosas, that the full shape of things began to reveal itself. I arrived, plate of blueberry scones in hand, to find the usual crowd already huddled together, their conversation draining away as I walked in. Jessica met me halfway, smiling just a little too tightly. She barely touched my arm in greeting, her gaze darting quickly away. I told myself it was nothing, like always, but as laughter picked up again, floating around me, I felt a gnawing anxiety. My name, when it surfaced at all, came with hesitant glances and a certain coolness. Afterwards, as the guests trickled out and plates of crumbs were stacked in the sink, my friend Rachel lingered. She bit her lip, hesitated, and finally took a breath. "Are you okay, Em?" she asked, her tone hesitant. "I mean, with everything Jessica's been saying." My heart thudded. "What do you mean?" She looked uncomfortable, and I could tell she was struggling to find the right words. "She's just, I don't know, Em. She said that you haven't really been supportive of her and Adam, that you maybe tried to get between them." I didn't want to believe her, but she shrugged, visibly upset. The rest of the world seemed to drop away. I stood there, sticky and shaky, chocolate scone crumbs on my hands, and tried to blink away the tears. Part of me wanted to storm over to Jessica and demand the truth, but a deeper, quieter part felt a cold chill at the base of my spine. This wasn't jealousy or a spat. This was something more deliberate, calculated. I retreated home, phone buzzing with half-hearted apologies from Rachel. That night, I barely slept. My mind replayed months of whispered conversations, Jessica's sudden evasions, the way Adam had grown distant, reluctant even to meet my eyes at events. The friendships I had built over years seemed suddenly brittle. The next week, my suspicions grew. Every day brought a new, subtle exclusion. I'd check my social media and see group photos from gatherings I'd never even heard about. Jessica, front and center, Adam at her side, our friends clustered around them. Comments beneath the photos hinted at inside jokes and alliances forming outside my view. At work, colleagues I'd once shared easy banter with now offered only small talk and quick exits. One evening, I found myself scrolling through old messages, group chats with Jessica and Adam, planning nights out, swapping memes, sharing the mundane details that build intimacy. Lately, those chats had gone silent, texts turning dry, responses clipped and formulaic. Jessica's name appeared more often in private side threads I wasn't a part of. I remembered how she'd always been quick-witted, persuasive. She knew how to spin a story, to win people to her side, and for the first time, I wondered if that charm was being weaponized against me. Still, I gave Jessica the benefit of the doubt. We'd weathered so much together. Surely there was an explanation, a misunderstanding, a stress she hadn't confided in me. Anything but malice. I refused to believe that my friend, the one who'd once held me through heartbreak and cheered at my every small victory, could truly turn on me. A week later, everything unraveled. It happened on a cold Thursday night, the city fog thick, headlights carving ghost trails through the dusk. I got a call from Adam. Not a text, but a rare, actual call. My heart leapt, hope and hurt tangled together, until I heard his voice. Tense, flat. "I think we should talk," he said. We met at a neutral coffee shop half a block from my apartment. Somewhere bright, public, with too much noise to allow for old, easy confidences. Adam sat across from me, his face shadowed in the window light. He didn't look angry, exactly, just wary. "I've been hearing a lot of things lately," he started. "Jessica's told me. Well, actually, I've heard it from a few people, that you weren't really supportive of us, that you said things about her, tried to make me doubt our relationship." I opened my mouth, words evaporating from the shock. "That's not true," I managed finally, voice hoarse. "Adam, I never—" He held up a hand, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. "I just wanted to hear it from you. I don't know what to believe anymore." We sat in awkward silence, the noise of the shop swallowing the distance between us. I searched his face for a trace of the easy warmth I'd once known, but found only hesitation. After he left, I stared at the condensation on my coffee cup until it ran cold. When I finally returned home, resolve had replaced paralysis. It was time to know the truth, however ugly. I started collecting the fragments, screenshots of texts forwarded to me by friends, old direct messages between Jessica and others, emails fraught with suggestion. It became clear, as I pieced them together, this wasn't accidental. Jessica had been whispering poison into the ears of everyone who mattered in our world. Emily can't be trusted. She's manipulative. She was never really happy for us. Some of the lies were subtle, others blatant. The effect was the same. Sowing doubt, cutting me from the herd, little by little. The pain was sharp, but so was another feeling, anger. I had spent months convincing myself that shrinking and sacrificing would keep my friendship with Jessica afloat. Now it became obvious. She'd been building an entirely new version of the truth, where I was cast as villain, obstacle, betrayer. At first, the unfairness threatened to swallow me. I lost sleep to winding arguments in my mind. What I'd say if confronted, what I'd demand as an apology, whether a single accusation refuted would change anything at all. In reality, I barely saw Jessica. When we crossed paths, her smile was all surface, barely masking the wariness in her eyes. I remembered her skill with people, how she could read a room and tip its mood with a joke or a compliment. I used to envy that skill. Now it was turned against me, and I understood for the first time how terrifying power could be in the wrong hands. There were moments of cowardice. I don't pretend otherwise. Times when I considered letting things fade, allowing myself to disappear from this circle of friends. San Francisco's a big city, after all. People drift. It's easy to vanish and pretend it was always fate. But then, inevitably, I'd run into someone who'd once called me a confidant, only to greet me with reserved politeness, or worse, pity. And I'd remember who I was before heartbreak and humiliation, someone who stood up for what mattered. So, I began documenting every whisper, every false narrative, every slight that could be traced back to Jessica. Screenshots, recordings, voicemails shared in the dark by friends who'd grown uneasy about the growing tension. I became a detective in my own life, mapping betrayal not out of vengeance, but for survival. Through it all, I questioned myself relentlessly. Was there some kernel of truth to the accusations? Had I unknowingly undermined Jessica or Adam, or sown seeds of doubt with a stray comment? Guilt mixed with anger. Sorrow tumbled over indignation. I replayed moments in my mind, staying up with Jessica during her worst panic attacks, the way we'd promised, no matter what, we choose each other. The time she'd held my hand as I received bad news from a family member. But as the evidence mounted, it became impossible to ignore the fracture lines running straight through us. Some part of her had decided that my disappearance was necessary for her own story. The hardest part wasn't losing Adam. In some quietly resigned way, I had been letting that dream go since the fall. It was realizing that my best friend had deliberately carved me out of her life, not by honest confession or painful conversation, but by rewriting me as a threat to be neutralized. My world, once so vividly colored by connection and trust, narrowed sharply. Weekends were spent alone on long walks along the windy marina, sorting my thoughts. I filled journals with memories, both sweet and sour, hoping to tease apart what had been real. Each page carried echoes of our inside jokes, secret codes, and sleepy promises from college, ghosts of a friendship that now felt irretrievable. Sometimes, the urge to confront Jessica overwhelmed me. I rehearsed speeches in my head, letter-perfect indictments and appeals for truth. But the words always soured before I could send them. What was the point? Any hope for honesty had been buried beneath layers of denial and self-preservation. Instead, I focused on the work of healing myself. Therapy sessions, new hobbies, book clubs, anything that reminded me there were worlds outside the suffocating orbit I'd shared with Jessica. I deepened my own sense of self. Not Emily, who was Jessica's shadow, but Emily, who survived betrayal and chose to persist. It wasn't all strength. Grief came in waves. Seeing a favorite movie on streaming and remembering the time Jessica and I watched it, curled in a heap, plotting our someday vacations. Passing the bakery, where we'd spent hungover mornings, sharing guilty croissants. Finding a sweater she'd lent me, long forgotten at the back of my closet. But the grief gradually became less raw, replaced by a sharper resolve. If Jessica could shape the narrative, so could I. I didn't need to shout my truth from rooftops, yet, but I wasn't going to vanish either. In the gathering months, I quietly prepared. The time for silence was past. The time for fighting for myself, honestly, with courage, had finally, truly begun. Determined to turn the tables, it took time for my anger to sharpen into determination. For too long, I'd been paralyzed by grief, floating through my days in quiet pain, accepting the story Jessica spun about me as if it were an inevitable part of growing up and growing apart. But beneath the surface, my outrage gathered strength, like a rising tide. I realized, perhaps for the first time in my life, that passivity and empathy are not the same thing. I'd let Jessica dictate my place in our circle, and I had let her poison redefine my very character. That realization stung more than any of her lies. There were mornings when I woke with anxiety pressing on my chest, only to find it transformed by midday into steely purpose. Instead of hanging my head at mutual friends' cool greetings or scrolling past photos of gatherings I hadn't been invited to, I started to document everything with careful attention. Every rumor, every exclusion, every snippet of evidence that pointed to Jessica's campaign against me. I saved it meticulously in a private folder, labeled only with my initials. Emails, texts forwarded by uneasy friends, screenshots of barely veiled digs in group chats. It all became a catalog, not of grievances, but of truth. At first, I didn't know what I hoped to accomplish. I just wanted justice, in whatever small, private way I could grasp it. Maybe I expected that, with enough proof, I could confront Jessica and make her admit what she'd done. Maybe I still foolishly longed for an apology, or at least for some sliver of our old friendship to be restored by facing painful reality together. But as winter bore down on San Francisco, the air sharp with rain and the city's neon bars glowing against the dark, my priorities shifted. It was during those cold months that I learned the real strength wasn't in holding on to an imagined happy ending, but in claiming my voice. Step by step, I began to reconnect with people who had quietly drifted from our circle. Colleagues, former classmates, friends from my first startup job, all of whom had once known me, apart from Jessica's influence. I arranged coffee with Rachel, who had tried to warn me. I dropped a casual line to Mark, who remembered the kind of person I was before everything got messy. Slowly, I rebuilt those bridges, grounding myself in memories, in friendship that predated betrayal. To my quiet surprise, many were receptive. They shared observations and sometimes, to my silent relief, expressed their own doubts about the rumors Jessica had circulated. What they revealed matched my own experience. Jessica had not only subtly accused me of sabotaging her relationship with Adam, but she'd recast my very character, suggesting ulterior motives and even professional jealousy. A picture came into focus. Jessica was performing for the crowd, and her new image thrived on my erasure. I realized any hope of facing her one-on-one was pointless. This wasn't just about our friendship, but about my place in the larger community I'd lost. I needed to take a stand in public, not just in private. The perfect chance came with the annual spring mixer for San Francisco's young professionals, a gathering thrown every year in a light-filled Soma loft, with music echoing off concrete floors, and everyone in the city's tight-knit social circuit in attendance. The event was both formal and festive. It offered a neutral battleground, and, importantly, all the major players, Jessica included, would be present. The night of the mixer, my nerves thrummed with adrenaline. I dressed deliberately, choosing a simple, confident look that made me feel both true to myself and ready to be seen. My mind replayed what I would say, over and over, never cruel, only honest. The folder of evidence was tucked into my phone's private files, ready to be shared at a moment's notice if anyone doubted my account. As I entered the venue, the buzz of conversation enveloped me, an electric undercurrent of laughter and music. Jessica was impossible to miss, holding court near the bar, Adam beside her, their body language radiating ownership of the night. She looked up, our gazes meeting across the crowd. I held her eyes, refusing, for the first time, not to look away. Throughout the evening, I moved from group to group, quietly re-establishing connections. I offered warmth, transparency, and no excuses. When curious acquaintances tentatively brought up the tensions of the past winter, I didn't deflect. Instead, I told them my truth, calmly and clearly. I stepped aside for Jessica and Adam out of respect for their happiness, I explained, and I hoped to preserve our friendship with honesty. What's been said about me simply isn't true, and I have the messages to prove it if anyone needs clarification. Some people looked uncomfortable. A few asked quiet questions. Some, I could tell, were already beginning to doubt Jessica's narrative, recalling for themselves the patterns that hadn't added up. Finally, as the crowd swirled with the promise of last rounds and late-night toasts, I approached Adam. He was surprised, but he didn't turn away. I met his eyes, steady and composed. I wish things had turned out differently, I told him, but I never betrayed you, or Jessica, whatever she said to you. I hope someday you'll see the truth. I handed him my phone, without a word. He scrolled through messages and emails for a long, silent minute, brow creasing as he realized what had been done in his name. Jessica appeared beside him, tension radiating off her. "What's going on?" she demanded. I looked at her, not with anger now, but with something gentler, sadder, but infinitely stronger. I deserve to be heard, not lied about in whispers and private chats. If we're ever going to grow past this, it starts with honesty. That's all I ever wanted. At that moment, I felt the shame, guilt, and confusion wash away, replaced by relief, a sense that I'd finally reclaimed a part of myself I hadn't even realized was lost. The fallout wasn't immediate. Some friendships took time to reknit, while others would never quite come back. Jessica's influence slowly waned, her credibility questioned by those who saw the realities behind her charm. Adam, for his part, eventually apologized. It wasn't perfect or easy, but it was enough. Looking back, I can say with certainty that reclaiming my story was worth every shaking breath and sleepless night. Turning the tables wasn't an act of revenge, but an act of self-respect. I learned through fire that courage doesn't mean never being afraid. It means choosing the truth, even when your voice trembles. I am not the same Emily who watched her world spin apart in silence. I am Emily who learned to fight for herself, who knows her worth, and who, after all the secrets, heartbreak, and betrayal, finally believes her own story is enough. Justice and lessons for a lifetime. If there's anything I've learned about surviving betrayal, it's that justice doesn't arrive with fireworks. It unspools quietly, in increments measured not by how loudly someone falls from grace, but by the slow regrowth of inner dignity. For a long time, I believed that if the truth ever shone through, if Jessica's lies were revealed, if all that I suffered in silence gained witnesses, there would be a moment of dazzling vindication, a scene out of a movie, the wrong made right in one glorious sweep. But real life is quieter, messier, more subtle, and, in its way, far more profound. The weeks after the spring mixer blurred together. At first, relief and nervousness intermingled. I wasn't sure how people would respond to the new narrative, or if my evidence would be enough to plant seeds of doubt where Jessica's charm had blossomed for so long. Some people shied away from the subject altogether, too uncomfortable to acknowledge they'd once believed the rumors. Others sent me tentative texts of support, or simply, "I'm so sorry," which, inelegant as it was, meant more to me than I could say. Most telling, perhaps, were the few who confessed to seeing cracks in Jessica's story all along, admitting that loyalty and inertia had kept them silent. For a while, the city felt like a maze. I second-guessed invitations, wondering if I was being included sincerely or just because people pitied me. I checked my phone obsessively, nerves prickling every time a new message or tag appeared. Was I being discussed in yet another group chat? Was Jessica rebuilding her army elsewhere? Or had the truth truly defanged her? There was no dramatic confrontation in the middle of a crowded room, no satisfying villain reveal, just a slow, perceptible shift. Jessica's influence began to fade. People reached out to me again, for brunches, museum visits, book clubs, or simply for company on a foggy Sunday in Dolores Park. The first time I saw Jessica after the confrontation, it was in a coffee shop in the inner Sunset. We weren't alone. San Francisco is a web of overlapping social circles, but when our eyes met, she smiled a tight, unfamiliar half-smile and looked away. I searched her face for a trace of malice, or even an apology, but found something else, weariness. Later, one of our mutual friends slid into the seat across from me, her coffee balanced precariously in hand. She didn't bring up the drama outright, but I could tell from her careful questions that word had spread. What surprised me was the undercurrent of respect in her tone. Not pity, not awkwardness, but genuine respect that I'd stood up for myself instead of fading quietly from view. Rebuilding my reputation didn't happen overnight. Some people never quite trusted me again. Perhaps out of guilt that they'd so readily turned their backs, or perhaps because shifting loyalty twice in one friendship saga was just too much for their comfort. But others re-entered my life naturally, the way sunlight creeps back through storm clouds. The gratitude I felt for this soft, gradual acceptance was humbling. I started going to gatherings again, not out of obligation, but because I wanted human connection. Not once did I try to clear my name anymore. The people who mattered had seen enough. The most unexpected reconciliation was with Adam. It began slowly, just a series of neutral, almost awkward conversations at group events, each one a little less stilted than the last. He apologized, both directly and indirectly, for doubting me. I told him the truth, that it was never just about him, and that what truly hurt was losing faith in my own instincts and in my friends, who had so quickly assumed the worst. We would never go back to being close friends, much less anything more. But that no longer stung the way it once did. He, too, had been swept up in the tide. With Jessica, forgiveness was less clear. We never sat down for a heart-to-heart. There was no demand for explanation, no cinematic showdown or cathartic tears. I think we both knew that whatever foundation we'd once built had cracked too deeply to repair. There were times I caught her glancing at me, her expression unreadable. Was she resentful that her web had unraveled? Was she filled with regret? Or was she simply moving on, as so many people do in this city of endless reinvention? The urge to hate her, to see her as nothing but a villain, eventually faded. In its place grew something more profound, the realization that people hurt others out of their own wounds and weaknesses. Jessica wasn't evil. She wasn't all bad, and she wasn't all good. She was a human being, terrified of losing control, desperate to win, even if it meant rewriting the rules of loyalty. Her choices cost me dearly, but holding on to that pain would only cost me more. Justice arrived, not when Jessica was exposed, but when I was able to reclaim my own narrative, out loud, for anyone who cared to listen, and quietly, in the way I walked through the world. I stopped apologizing for wanting to be seen. I stopped making myself small out of fear that shining too brightly would drive people away or breed jealousy. Instead, I embraced the truth that sometimes surviving means celebrating your resilience, not your victimhood. The lessons of that year have stayed with me in ways I couldn't have imagined. I am more careful with friendships now, not guarded, but discerning. I trust my instincts, and when someone's words don't match their actions, I pay attention. I learn to ask for what I want, to say no without guilt, and to say yes to things that nourish me, even if it means disappointing someone else. For so long, I thought selflessness was the ultimate virtue. Now I know boundaries are a form of respect, not just for myself, but for everyone around me. My relationship with the city also changed. San Francisco, once a backdrop to my closest memories, became a landscape for rediscovery. I wandered new neighborhoods, visited galleries alone, signed up for ceramics classes, and volunteer work. I met people who knew nothing about my history with Jessica, people to whom I was just Emily, product manager, lover of old bookstores and open water swims. For a long time, I thought my story would always be tied to betrayal. But now, I see it's just one chapter in a book that keeps being written. Some nights, when the fog rolls in and the city lights turn everything soft and ghostly, I think about what I'd say if I could send a letter to my younger self, the Emily who bent over backward to keep the peace, who feared that disagreement meant abandonment, who thought being a good friend meant never wanting something for herself. The message is simple. You have the right to your happiness. You have the right to occupy space, to make mistakes, and to fight for your own dignity when someone seeks to erase it. Would I erase what happened if I could? Sometimes, on harder days, I want to say yes. But even as the echoes of pain linger, I'm grateful for the clarity left in their wake. I discovered courage I didn't know I possessed. I learned that healing isn't a performance. It's a practice, sometimes measured in inches, not miles. In the months since, I've deepened relationships with a handful of friends who weathered the storm with me, not as my rescuers, but as witnesses to my vulnerability and my stubborn, halting grace. We speak more honestly with each other now, about jealousy, about insecurity, about the ways ambition and love can poison even the closest bonds if left unchecked. These friendships feel stronger, tempered like steel. One spring afternoon, as I walked along the Embarcadero, the bay alive with sailboats and sunlight, I ran into Rachel, the friend who tried, gently, to warn me. Over coffee, we talked about forgiveness, the strange loyalties that bind and betray us, and the beauty of learning who stands by you when everything else falls away. Before we parted, she squeezed my hand. You're different now, but in the best way. Stronger, realer. Her words settled into me, warm and reassuring. I think the greatest justice, in the end, is to live on our terms, not out of spite, but with open-hearted intention, to invite laughter, real connection, and even new risks. When I meet someone new now, I don't hide the scar of what happened. I share it, if it feels right, not as a warning or a burden, but as a part of becoming. It's the lesson life inscribes again and again, that integrity, once claimed, can't be stolen by anyone's lies. There will always be people who choose easy loyalty over uncomfortable truth, who prefer a tidy story to a messy reality. I can't control them, but I can control how I show up for myself, and for those whose love is measured not by convenience, but by courage. If you are reading this, if you find yourself on the edge of heartbreak, questioning whether it's worth speaking out, fearing you'll lose everything if you dare to contradict someone else's version of events, I hope you remember this. Silence will not save you. Your story, told bravely and kindly, will. Sometimes justice is loud. Sometimes it is silent. Either way, it is yours to define. And, perhaps most importantly, justice isn't some ultimate victory over your adversary. It's the quiet reclamation of your own worth, the wisdom to forgive, and the strength to begin again. That, at long last, is the lesson I'll carry for the rest of my life.